From Napalm Death. Which one was that?
Harmony Corruption. That was you'd have to really hear their early stuff to put that one into context. That's the thing, and that's what you do though, being you, is you jump into a band halfway here where they do this album that they all hate and the fans hate, and I like it.
And I end up love. Well, and I think in a weird way, like I love that because, so for example, I can love Cannibal Corpse with Corpse Grinder as the vocalist because I'm not, I was not there in the beginning, so I don't have an emotional investment in a lot of.
Well, for that, it's
in a lot of music.
Cannibal Corpse largely sounds the same all the way across the board or anything. It's just the same thing over and over.
See, I don't get that because it's like I could say the same about Hypocrisy in a weird way. Like,
well, I mean, they have some samey sounding stuff too.
But they sound like Hypocrisy, and it's like AC/DC.
Like Hypocrisy's new album just came out. I forget what it's called, but it's kind of more or less.
I listened to it, and it sounded like Hypocrisy to me.
Well, it does. It's good, but it's just the same old thing. But if you like that and then you expect it, then you're not going to be disappointed. But here's the thing: is Hypocrisy started out as like really brutal Swedish death metal, like all those other bands,
evolved into.
And they actually put out an album called The Fourth Dimension, which totally different. It was like slow, heavy, dirgy songs. The guitar, the heavy Swedish sound was gone. It was just this soupy, muddy, like sludgy death metal sound that was really different. They ditched their logo. It wasn't the fiery 666 logo anymore. It was just like the letters that say Hypocrisy. The cover was different. It wasn't a painting of like monsters and demons. It was a guy taped into a chair.
I loved their album covers. Like, I love that they kind of moved into like almost an alien abduction sort of.
And that was the next album,
sci-fi thing.
Abducted, that's their Rain and Blood. That's their big moment. That was like best albums, and that album's really good because it's really different, unique sounding death metal with lots of good effects, like different vocal styles across it. But then at the very end of it, there are two songs that almost sound like a really dark Pink Floyd or something. It's just really bizarre. Like they're clean vocals, keyboards, but like the structure of the music isn't metal. It's like just ambient death rock or something.
You know what? I mean, once again, I think that kind of is, and that's another thing that could almost be a topic of discussion. Is just like in extreme music, like in extreme metal. I think the way I describe it, like people ask me why I love that music so much, is because I think in a weird way, and it kind of almost sounds counterintuitive, I think metal in general is sonically neutral, and it allows you to throw anything into it. You know what I mean? Symphonic, electronic music, you can throw it into metal and it works. Jazz, you can throw into metal and it works. You know what I mean? You can't do that with other genres, really. You can't throw in death metal into country and it won't work. But a death metal band could probably rip out a country lick in the middle of one of their songs and it would make perfect sense.
There's actually a Swedish death metal band called Tiamat.
Yeah.
On the first album, they were Swedish death, but they weren't like that heavy brutal stuff like everybody else. They were more of like an ethereal keyboard, kind of dark sound. But their first album, they had a song that had like some serious blues riffs in it, and it really put people off. And their name was Treblinka when they first started out, which is a Nazi concentration camp.
Yikes.
And they're not Nazis, but it was just
I know.
super death name they picked, and it was a bad idea. That's why they changed it to Tiamat. But
yeah.
But funny about Hypocrisy is for as diverse as Abducted was, the follow-up was I think it was just the self-titled album, Hypocrisy. I can't remember the name of it right off the top. Well, I guess I could just look on the computer right here. But anyway, that album, the next album was like really heavy death metal, and it was supposed to have been their last album.
Yeah.
And the fans just cried out and said, no, you can't break up. So they came back with another album, and that was the self-titled one. And that one had like some serious like Judas Priest sounding riffs and vocals on it.
Cool.
And
I might have to do a deep dive. I haven't really done a deep dive on Hypocrisy, and I know they're one of your your faves. I did see them live. They opened for Dimmu Borgir. In Children of Bodom,
we need to do a show on Hypocrisy.
But
anyway, saying the Hypocrisy record came out, and that self-titled one had a very Judas Priest flavor to it in some ways, but with death metal. And then after that, God damn it, I cannot find, there's like, it has every album listed here except for the one I'm looking for. Like, I don't get this. The final chapter, God. Okay, the final chapter, it was the follow-up to Abducted. It was heavy death metal. It was still good. He had like low and high vocals, which was unique. Not a lot of bands did that anymore, in death metal anyway. It's a staple for grindcore. But then about 2 albums later, they did an album called Catch 22. And you would like this, because in that record, Peter, the main dude from Hypocrisy, was really into Slipknot, and he was unashamedly a fan of the band. Slipknot got a lot of shit from metalheads, including me, back in the 90s, because everybody was like, oh, they're metal. And people would call up at the radio station and want me to play it. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
He was a proud Slipknot fan, and that album, Catch 22, had like an extreme influential like input based on his love for Slipknot. So it was like a really rock sounding album with like really different song arrangements and guitar playing. So you might like that one.
Maybe, but I gotta admit, man, I'm not a fan of Slipknot. Like,
well, I'm just saying, you tend to like those albums all the other people hate out of death metal bands, or just like Celtic Frost, Cold Lake, or what was the other one we just talked about? Carcass, Heartwork, and
Evisceration Plague by Cannibal. Well, here's Cannibal Corpse.
Probably gonna love Napalm Death, Harmony Corruption, and I don't hate Harmony Corruption. It's a good album, but it's not Napalm Death. They're not. They have that Morris sound thing, and like.
So they lost on that album. They didn't have the napalm. They had just the death.
I don't know. It sounds like Morris sound tries to make they tune down, like they are not tuned down, but like they tone stuff down so there's not as much fuzz and noise and like razors sticking out everywhere. But that's what death metal is. They're like, no, produce that down. And here's another band, Suffocation. Their first release was Human Waste, an EP. It was super, super heavy. Really good death metal debut. Didn't sound like most American bands and were going to end up sounding like. But then when they went to Morrisound and did their debut album, Effigy of the Forgotten, it was like this watered down, like not so heavy, just kind of like weak sounding album. And it didn't really showcase who they were to me. And it was just like this fast.
But didn't they they redeemed themselves on Pierce from Within? Isn't that like their pinnacle sort of, isn't that the quintessential Suffocation? Like if you're going to tell someone, like introduce someone to Suffocation, you'd say Pierce from Within, right?
Not really so much. I mean, that's an okay album. To me, it was like Human Waste is a good one, and then the EP Despise the Sun is another great one. Other than that, I gotta be honest, most of their stuff also tends to sound the same because they kept going back to Morrisound, and like Effigy of the Forgotten was really just a boring album because it was the same thing all the way through. It's just solos and his vocals, and that's all it was. And like Human Waste, it was a whole different band. It was the same guys, but the sound was so different. It was like heavy and fast, and like the songs were like they had like identity, and like they lose that when you go to Morrisound. Like so many bands lose that. But then other bands that I think you like Cynic, Sadist, Gorgut, Simulation, all those bands go there, and they're about guitars and like the riffing and all of that, and that's why you should go there. The bands like Napalm Death don't benefit from that.
I'm surprised. I'm curious. I'd be curious to know what Morbid Angel would have sounded like with Scott Burns.
I'm pretty
because they never did it,
wasn't it, for their first one anyway?
No, Scott Burns never. I think they may have recorded at Morrisound, but I don't think they ever had Scott Burns producing.
See, I wish I had. Well, I don't know. Maybe I do. Let me see if I have.
And we got to remember that for a topic, because I want you to give that. I want you to listen to the new Morbid Angel album and see if you can change your tune on that.
Change my tune?
Yes, because yeah, you said the newest Morbid Angel, or the stuff with Steve Tucker, is just your standard just run-of-the-mill death metal, and I disagree. I think Morbid Angel is Trey Azagthoth, and he does not play. He never plays normal run-of-the-mill riffs. I mean, he's as sick as he's ever been, I think, on that album. In fact, I think that newest album has some of his most twisted sounding riffs ever.
Okay, well, I mean, that's riffs. What else? Is there anything else good about it though? Like from a non-guitarist standpoint?
Yes, like, because I told you, like, I was actually in the, and I love David Vincent, just from a vocal standpoint and from just the way he projects himself. He's just this icon, just the coolest looking, sounding, acting dude, I think, in the scene. But I gotta tell you, dude, when it comes to just pure just hateful, ferocious vocals, Steve Tucker, hands down, dude. I mean, he just sounds, especially on the new album, he just sounds completely malicious. Like it's pretty amazing. I think he, from a brutality standpoint, Tucker tops Vincent on that. Vincent is more like David Vincent. I consider him almost like a more elegant. Like he's kind of like a Nosferatu, like a Anne Rice character. You know what I mean? Kind of the sophisticated sort of approach. Whereas Steve Tucker, I think, is just primal evil, and I think he's incredible. I think it really stands out.
I don't know. I'd have to hear the newer one, but all their other stuff that has Steve Tucker on it, it just sounds like any other death metal band to me. I mean, it's Trey's playing, yeah, but I mean, they lose that identity without David's vocals because it was.
Well, like I said, I think David Vincent added like almost that sort of sexiness, for lack of a better word. Yeah, man, dude, he was like the first, and I'd actually argue he's probably the only guy in death metal that could almost be like have a sex symbol quality to him. Like you look at those old pictures of him with his beautiful blonde hair and abs. And hot, beautiful ass. I mean, no, I mean,
he was like, beautiful ass. What?
He was like he was like the David
Lee Roth. Just for the record, everybody, Mark Hansen is heterosexual, just as far as I knew, anyway. But
dude, who cares? It's just
not that there's anything wrong with that.
But he's like a David Lee Roth almost.
I get what you're saying. David Vincent's a good-looking guy and all that, but like as far as death metal goes, his vocals. Okay, let me put it to you this way: in the early '90s, late '80s, the Grind Crusher compilation from Earache Records came out, and it showcased the first wave of all these grindcore and death metal bands. Mm-hmm. Up to this point, no one had ever heard music like that, and there weren't very many all-metal labels, just Metal Blade.
Right, they didn't really get into the death metal game until later on. With Cannibal Corpse was.
Well, yeah. So
Metal Blade took Cannibal Corpse.
The household word yet, like.
Right.
So the Morbid Angel was it, and that was the first song on the Grind Crusher record. And I came home with that, and I put it on. I was like, "What the fuck is this?" It was so fast and heavy, and the vocal was just like evil. I'm like, "Whoa, that's Morbid Angel." Now with this other guy, I'm sure he sounds aggressive and all of that. Yeah, I've heard it, but it's not the same thing. It doesn't have that same evil sounding power. They sound more like Immolation with that guy singing, and to me that's boring. Immolation just loses me.
So maybe evil is not so,
but that's what they're about.
David has kind of like
is a Satanist as far as I know. He was a Satanist. Yeah. Is or was.
I was going to say there's an actual like intellectual almost approach to David Vincent. Does that make sense?
That's
like,
right. There you go. Like from the church.
So
there you same attack on another band, and Nocturnus even, I think maybe, but.
And that's what I mean, but I would even argue that like lyrically, Steven Tucker has really come into it on that new album with just very cerebral sounding lyrics that are just incredibly dark.
Oh, I
but
haven't heard
almost
this album.
almost sound they almost sound like ancient incantation. Not the band incantations, but you almost sound like you're hearing just some like forbidden text being sung to you, like it's really crazy cool. I think, and I think Steve Tucker probably has pressure to sort of prove himself as that, as both, vicious and brutal sounding and with that sort of very artistic, well-crafted words.
Well, we won't get too far into this because I think this is going to be our next show topic, is either Morbid Angel or Hypocrisy. But yeah, they were one of the first bands who did it, and ironically, the second band on that album after Morbid Angel were Carcass. And the Carcass track I thought was amazing, but it was this horrible produced rehearsal demo track of Exhume to Consume from the forthcoming Symphonies of Sickness album. And on that Grind Crusher album, that version of Exhume to Consume was so heavy and just noisy, and it was just a practice song. That's all it really was. They just threw it on the record really quick. It did the trick. It was really heavy and noisy. You'd never heard music like this. It blew me away. But then on the album, it was produced down. It had a solo in it and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't quite like that Grind Crusher version. But I liked it. And so it was really cool.
Do you think so? Do you think production? So it sounds like something you think the music loses something when they start kind of putting it a little more under the production microscope, right?
That's one of my other things I was just going to say, is alongside with Swedish death metal, the Gothenburg sound, like the American camp over here, all go to Florida. They all go to Morrisound, and then they all sound like that Suffocation Effigy of the Forgotten record, where it's just flat delivery, flat vocals, clean recording, triggered drums. It's all antiseptic, clinical, and that's not what death metal is. If you listen to it on the Grind Crusher record, even the Morbid Angel track, it's heavy and it's dirty, and that's what metal is supposed to be to me. It's dangerous. We had this argument before. Like, that's why I don't like Dream Theater. And it's funny because you say you got into death metal because of Dream Theater.
But to me, is the reason being is like Dream Theater showed was something new of just how far someone can push their instruments. So I actually.
Yeah, but to the average listener, we're not caring about instrumentation and such. We just want to hear aggressive music. That's the thing.
Is any extreme metal person an average listener? Part of it is, I think we talked about that before. I with extreme metal, there's not really, you can't really be a passive listener to it.
Well, no, you're like, metal is like Satanism. You either are or you aren't. There's no casual bullshit. Mm-hmm. I've always said that. That's why when people say, oh, I like metal, like Slipknot, Five Finger Death Punch, like, get the fuck out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. And then other people are like, oh, I listen to sometimes. I like everything, though. Like, no, you fucking don't.
Oh, dude, that's another topic in itself. Those people, those musical trash compactors is what I call them. Someone who says they listen to everything. It's like, fuck you.
Everybody is defined by their music, and like the people who don't resonate with music are strange to me. You're like zombies. Like, how can you not be moved? That's the whole point of music, is it moves people. Going back to the earliest primeval shit with people banging drums or rocks, right? That's the point of it. It moves you and gets in your soul and your body, and you move to it, whether it's dancing or just something, or headbanging or whatever. I mean, people who say, oh, I just listen to whatever's on the radio. No, you fucking don't. If you do, you're truly a pathetic person. I mean,
a trash compactor.
What do you live for? You watch football and that's it? Like, your favorite song is dun 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 dun, the NFL theme, it's like, no, fuck off.
Yeah.
So anyways, with metal, like, it's all inclusive. Like, you're either all or none. There's no in between namby-pamby bullshit where you don't know what the fuck you're into. You kind of like this, you kind of like that. It's just like, if you're a Satanist, you were born a Satanist. You are, if you were. There's no dabbling in it. And that's why most Church of Satan people look at things like what's that other thing? The Satanic Temple. Like, oh, no, that's not even close. So... we won't get into that either.
I think I don't need to go to some stuffy old satanic temple to be close to Satan. I can do it just kidding.
You can do it.
I would say I am a passive Satanist. I'm Satanist adjacent because I'm friends with you.
Well, it's the same thing. It's like that's what I've always said is metal is like Satanism and Satanism is like metal. You're either born liking that, resonating to it, you're drawn to it, or you're
I
not.
agree. I think there's
Just
almost
like things. Like there are kids who most kids like sports and cars and famous people and all that kind of shit. There's always that one kid, of which you and I were both this kid that liked monsters and vampires and cloudy skies and death metal, and everybody else doesn't like it. Like, why do you like that shit? And like, why do you like that shit? Why do you like to be like everybody else? And that's not why, is to be unique.
No.
I still get that shit at work from my coworkers.
It would be a lot easier if we were just like everybody else and liked whatever was given to us, and that way we could be popular, and I would have gotten laid before I got out of high school, all that kind of thing,
That's the bonus of liking metal, though, is you're part of this elite, unique little cadre of people that all know this thing, and you're united by it. That's what's cool about it. That's why if Carcass comes, back in the day when they were playing like smaller venues, they'd come down off the stage after the show and you could just talk to them, and that was cool. Metallica doesn't do that now. I mean, but I've had pictures with the guy, and Carcass came with us to the radio station. Slayer wouldn't do that, probably. Maybe they would, but Carcass comes to the radio station. I annoyed Jeff Walker, but the Piss Shifter guys were really cool and we all got along. Like I've done that with numerous bands, Broken Hope, Decameron, Unleashed, Entombed, a lot of those bands back in the day. But
I'm trying to think. I think there's some shows coming that we should probably hit. Let me see. Rotting Christ.
Yeah, they're coming with a bunch of bands I don't like.
That's today. I can't make it.
Is that today?
Yes.
Oh.
We got oh wait, no. I was like Belphegor Suffocation. Oh wait, that was 2019. That was one of the last shows I went to before everything shut down.
I have not been to a concert other than seeing Dave Chappelle recently, comedy, but like the last concert I went to was Steely Dan like years ago, and that was when Walter Becker, their guitarist, was still alive. And that was arguably like probably one of the best concerts I've ever seen in my life. Like even Kiss with makeup on again, all of that. Steely Dan was fucking tight. So good. Everybody out there now is like, what the fuck? These guys just totally lost me with their metal argument. This motherfucker likes Steely Dan and Kiss.
Yeah, man. But we should hit a show. I'll keep my eyes out for that.
I'm pretty picky about shows. I don't go to just any show, but
me too, dude. I'm not saying we need to go to fucking.
Like I'm not going to see Flesh God Apocalypse, plus they're here like every weekend. So.
Oh, are they coming?
I don't fucking know. I just saw some guy in the restaurant yesterday with a hoodie on with that, and I was like, oh yeah, them.
Well, I like them. Once again, they're too produced for you, right? Is that?
I've actually. It's one of those bands that just don't really have anything to say to me. It's hard to say. And plus, when you've been into this for so long, this is my thing with Cannibal Corpse and Carcass. Yeah. So I was into Napalm Death when they came out. Then there was that band Repulsion, who were like really disgusting gore. Like their lyrics were over the top. Then you have death, scream, bloody gore, like all of that. Mm-hmm. Then Carcass came out with the autopsy photos, and like as far as I'm concerned, forensic lyrics, autopsy photos, intelligently written forensic lyrics that were actually disguising vegetarian ethos, even more clever. All of that was for a point. It wasn't just to shock and offend, but there was a point to it. You're not going to top Carcass. So all these other bands who came out, like Cannibal Corpse, Pathologist, all these bands that were copying Carcass's style. It was just like, no, you're not doing it. And like, that's one of the biggest things about Cannibal Corpse I didn't like, because they had that American sound, which is like really lots of like riffing and solos, which I don't love. But also,
but death metal solos are mostly bullshit. It's all about the riffs.
So they're just like throwing it out, riffs, dude. Repulsion, that band from Michigan, one of the things they're noted for too is they're so fast. Their solos are so fast. They're even faster than Slayer. That band never really got like the attention they quite deserved, at least for like, even a little bit, because their solos are so fast.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the grindcore sound came from. It's really fast, minute-long songs with like this solo that was like riff out of nowhere, like really fast.
Yeah.
Napalm Death did it, Carcass did it, Entomb did it. So you have Repulsion from Michigan to thank for that, and then all these other bands took it, made it their own, and they're the ones who kickstarted the grindcore scene.
Yeah,
And actually, funnily enough, the bass player of Repulsion, the guy who I said played that sloppy, grindy bass that inspired grindcore, he ended up touring with Cathedral when they were doing their Black Sabbath-y hippie shit.
Oh, really?
So how's that for a punch in the eye?
Hey, man. Like you said, dude, it's all inclusive. Metal is probably the most. It's the most exclusive
Metal, look at this,
and
like
inclusive genres out there. Like metal is everything. It's like
it's
it's
true. It's
everything
like
to everyone.
it's like a brotherhood because you see a guy in a Steelers jersey and you're like, whatever, Steelers, or you're like, fuck you, Steelers suck or whatever. But if you see a guy in a Napalm Death shirt, and I did this a week ago at work to a customer, like Napalm Death, you see him live, and like we just start talking and like, oh yeah.
Even if you're not a fan of Napalm Death, you just know like, okay, that guy's he's into something that you're into, right?
Or if you see a guy, like say you see a guy in a Flesh God Apocalypse shirt, you're like, oh yeah, what's that? You know, you like them? Well, you like heavier music than that? I got some shit you might want to hear. And so I go out to my car and give him a compilation CD out of my trunk. Like, here, listen to that.
But you could also go to a Mayhem or Deicide concert, and someone could be wearing a Striper t-shirt and not get fucked with.
Well, maybe not.
Well, we'll see. I'll try that next time Deicide's in town. I'll wear a Striper t-shirt.
See, here's the thing too is, and that's two different.
Dude, Cannibal Corpse. I mean, if you're talking about just content, like they're technically more offensive than Carcass. Outside of the autopsy photo.
That's the thing. That's why I didn't like them. Because to me, I would say they were kind of a more lowbrow Carcass. They were just doing stuff to be offensive. They were doing stuff
totally lowbrow.
Everybody.
Lyrically, it's lowbrow as shit. But I once again, I'm not into Cannibal Corpse.
They weren't dumb. They were just being tongue in cheek, like offensive and funny. Like she was asking for it and songs like that. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, strip raped and strangled.
That was.
But yeah,
line.
But they've even moved on from that. They don't really. They don't write songs like that. Well, and I think that was Chris Barnes kind of, they definitely lost, I think, probably.
So for them, that was like they're touching with like the offensive topics, like the kids in Norway touching on Nazism. It was like over here, it was sexism. So it was like just doing it to do it.
Yeah. But to me, Cannibal Corpse, I'm into them because I think the music is just so outstanding.
See, that's what drove me crazy is Carcass never got the attention they deserved for so many years because they were so much better. They were head and shoulders musically, lyrically, visually, conceptually above all these other bands, but it was Cannibal Corpse who got all this attention. And then Hypocrisy came on tour with Cannibal Corpse and opened for them. I'm like, get the fuck out of here.
So to me, it sounds like your dislike of Cannibal Corpse is not so much musical as it is.
Musically, they just do nothing.
Sour grapes.
It's like Suffocation's Effigy album. It's just the same thing over and over and over. I just can't get into it. Their first two albums, I will admit, they're okay. After that, though, I'm just not a fan. Like, I don't like all that riffing and floral.
I love riffing.
Like, I'm not into it. I'm not that guy. Like, Americans eat that shit up. Like, I'm European.
American. I eat that shit up.
You riffs. So you love Immolation. To me, Immolation, they're good.
It's why I prefer
sorry.
Which is why, believe it or not, I mean, I like Swedish death metal, but I'd rather listen to Polish death metal because they're more about like just these
decapitated. Now there's
punch you in the gut. Yeah.
Decapitated.
Because once again, what do they have that I love? They have tons of riffs, and they have these grooves that just.
Now, who is this?
Well, you mentioned him, Decapitated.
Oh, okay. I didn't think I was talking over you for a second, as I am wont to do sometimes.
But Cannibal Corpse has that too, and that's my favorite stuff. Is they'll be blazing like fast, and then all of a sudden it's like this mid-pace sort of chunky, violent riff that grooves. Like, I mean, it could almost be like an R&B feel if you strip the instruments away and just play something else over the top of it. I love that. I think it's amazing.
There's technicality, but then there's other bands who just play the same stuff over and over. Like,
well, no,
I met the guys in Cannibal Corpse. I've told you this. Corpse Grinder was a totally sweet, nice guy. Some of the other, I don't remember their names. And my friend Mike from Disordered, who was in Dying Fetus for 2 CDs, he was asked to play in Cannibal, but he couldn't do it because they were on tour. And that's where they got, I can't remember, the other guy from
Nevermore, Pat.
Somebody else was in Cannibal. It was when the bald dude, Jack, left Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, so Jack Owens left, and they got
Mike to be in the band. He was in Dying Fetus, but they were across the globe in Europe touring, and then like it didn't work out, so they had the other guy go in. And that was funny because Mike worshipped Cannibal Corpse. I was like, dude, go for it, go for it. He's like, oh, I can't. We're on tour in Europe, and it just didn't happen. But
yeah, I don't know why the guy's last name escapes me, but his name was Pat, and he got in some trouble fairly recently.
Pat O'Brien?
Pat O'Brien, yeah, it was Pat O'Brien.
Is that the guy that got into that, like, the gun explosion house thing?
Yeah, and I feel really bad for him. I hope he's doing all right. Yeah, so Pat O'Brien, and now they have Eric Rutan from Hate Eternal is played.
And he's been more for a while too.
Right. So he's on the new Cannibal Corpse album, and which I would once again argue is excellent.
And did you know that Hate Eternal's first record had Doug Cerrito, who was also the guitarist for Suffocation?
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things I kind of like about the death metal scene is it's sort of, you could call it incestuous, but there's, you have like bands like this Monstrosity where they basically train future Cannibal Corpse members,
Now, let me tell you this. Speaking of Monstrosity, now I like Monstrosity. They have some good.
But they're technical as shit.
They are, but they're good, especially their first one that has Corpse Grinder. I still have that fucking record.
Millennium?
7-inch too, and that's good. But the songs are different though from Cannibal Corpse. They're not all just like fast all the time. It's like there's heavy mid-tempo stuff like double bass traveling and all of that.
Exactly, and that Cannibal Corpse has that too, and that's why I like those kind of bands.
Well, maybe I haven't heard Corpse like in years. Like the last one I heard was. I don't know because they all sound the same. Maybe I think the Bleeding I played on the air once. I played it all the way. No,
that was a Chris
one
Barnes.
that had like Hammer Smash Face. I played that one all the way through once on my radio.
Hammer Smash Face is Tomb of the Mutilated.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I played that all the way through, and like I knew if I didn't do it, everybody was going to be up my ass to play Cannibal Corpse all night. So I'm like, okay, fuckers, here it is. All the way through. Don't ask me to play it ever again. Fuck off. And I played it, and I never played it again after that. I was a dick to my listeners, but
yes, you were.
Yeah, well,
we're gonna work on this. This is also.
I didn't mean to be. I went down. They have to understand is I dragged down there like 4 cases of CDs, a big box of records, a big box of 7-inch records, and 2 little boxes of tapes. Trying to get them into all this shit, and all I got was Slayer Cannibal, and they had those CDs. They do. They just wanted to hear the request on the air. We were talking about Carcass, and like that's kind of what I was going with American death metal. Is it all tends to go that Morrison way, where everybody has to have this extreme Slayer influence, where they're riffing and going fast, but they want super production. And to me, they've missed the boat entirely of what death metal is. That's why European metal is produced, but not quite so tightly as American. Like, I love Decapitated. Everything they do is phenomenal.
Yeah,
it's great.
That's some of the most clean. That's some of the most cleanest produced.
Different approach. It's not all just straightforward, fast, like solos flopping out all over the place. I mean, there's some of that, or like the band Evil Conscience. It's on my label. On Slaughter Records, Evil Conscience from India, like they're
total tech death.
They're so technical. I could not ignore how good they were, and I had to put that fucking thing out because they were such great musicians. Even the vocalist was a cop. They were like the Dream Theater of death metal, but from India.
Yeah,
they were like.
I was shocked. I was shocked when you introduced me to those guys. Like I'm like, JR's releasing a tech death album.
I could not ignore how good it was. I had to put it out, and I don't know what they've done since then. Like they're not really together anymore. I guess I don't know. I think they did something on their own, but
I'll admit, like there's even a point with me where it gets too polished because I think if you polish it too much, it takes out the heaviness. When something's too pristine and clean and produced.
That's what I'm saying.
But I don't think there's. no one, like, I don't think Cannibal Corpse ever reached that point. They always had like a really gnarly guitar sound. Like it wasn't like a smooth, processed guitar sound. They've always had just these ripping, almost out of control,
Well, it is, but that's my point.
distorted
They're
guitars.
also just riffing and soloing all the time, and it's not. It doesn't capture me either. It didn't me, but then again, let's look at it this way: is I already heard Carcass before that. So, like I said, visually, lyrically, sonically, conceptually, like Carcass was like the apex of gore grind. How could anything else even come close?
Yeah, I
So
mean, I can see your point on that. It's almost like
now this
when it comes to.
album, Torn Arteries, I'm like, this is really good. Actually, I really like this record. I didn't love
I'm
Surgical
glad.
Steel so much, but that's a
Well,
good record.
Surgical Still, the sound of that album sounds like the title. I mean, it sounds like surgical steel riffing. Like it's good. I love it,
It's a
but
little
it
bit
is a
like
very precise.
heading
Yeah.
towards this direction. It was a little bit dirtier, so I kind of liked it, but overall, I was like,
Hmm.
didn't do it for me. But this was actually really good. Like, I actually want
Yeah.
to buy this record. So, and that's,
I'm
I can't
glad. I'm glad you like that.
hardware anymore. I got rid of that like the week I bought it, back when it came out. So I did
You
not
know,
after it.
when was the last time you listened to Heartwork?
Probably the week I bought it when it came out.
Maybe give it I would.
I gotta
This is
say
always
that,
something kind of fun because like sometimes you write these things off and then years later you pull it back up and you're like you have kind of like a different perspective on it, and you might have a different perspective on
you're
Heartwork.
probably right, because I think I'm like really being unfair to Heartwork, mostly because they ditched their grindcore pathological roots.
Uh-huh.
And I was also seeing a lot of people getting into Carcass who thought that Necroticism or Heartwork was their first record. I'm like, you pussies, you don't know about Recaputrefaction and all of that. But here's a funny story for you: is I do that with a lot of bands. Like, I used to sell CDs at some shops here in town. I was trying to get rid of some of my old ones that I never listened to. And there's a band on Earache called Meat Hook Seed. Have you ever heard of them?
I've heard the name. I haven't heard them
It's
though.
like a Ministry styled industrial metal band. It's actually Mitch Harris of Napalm Death and
Okay.
guys from Obituary and Shane from Napalm Death.
Huh.
And they're doing like this industrial weird thing that you wouldn't think anybody from Obituary or Napalm would be doing. And I hated that record. I didn't like it, so I tried to sell it. It sat on the shelf at the heavy metal shop for like a decade almost, and no one bought it. And when I finally took it back and I like listened to it, I'm like, holy shit, this is really fucking good. And like, I like this record, and I kept it. I'm like, I came so close to selling it. It just sat on that shelf at that store forever. No one bought it, and now I have it. And it's like this rare version with this acetate cover, and I'm like,
I'll
man,
get
this
you.
is a good record, actually. This is, and so yeah, it happens. Like, there are records that you listen to that you kind of hate. So I probably need to revisit Heartwork, but the
Yeah, I
one after
mean,
that, Swan Song, I mean, even the band and Earache Records didn't like that. They were like, yeah,
well,
this is
yeah, you
sorry.
were saying that was like the contractual. I remember liking it because once again, like
That was a contract thing. It was,
that was one of those ones where it's like I was still pretty new to extreme music, so it was actually probably helped kind of solidify, my direction into it, meaning that it was tame enough that, you know, my delicate ears could take it in, but also extreme enough to kind of lead me down the path a little further. So there's kind of like that as far as like did it serve a purpose? Yeah.
you came
Um,
in from prog and glam into the death metal scene. That's why it's
yeah.
really funny, because
Very
you're
late.
time with all this noisy guitar, underproduced stuff.
Hmm.
But there's some of it that you kind of like, and that's funny because when I first heard Napalm Death Scum, the album, like that one, like kickstarted the entire grindcore scene, which of course begot death metal. And I heard it and I was like, that's pretty fast, but I'm just into thrash right now. That's a little more punk than I wanted.
Hmm.
So I'm looking for stuff like Bathory and Dark Angel. But then I went back to it. I'm like, but it's fast. And like, nah, the vocals though, there's a little gruff, like hardcore-ish,
Hmm.
but it is really fast. And one day I walked into Raunch Records and they were
Uh-huh.
playing the Grind Crusher. And then I was like, oh, wait, Napalm Death, fuck yeah, Scum. And then the rest was history, but it came with death metal, Morbid Angel, Carcass, Bolt Thrower, Terrorizer. It was like, holy shit, what is going on in Europe? And it was
Wow.
just, wow. And some of those bands were American. So it was like, holy, it's crazy. And here's a cool one for you. As a guitarist, do you know who James Plotkin is?
No.
He's pretty famous mostly in like noise, like ambient industrial guitar-based noise.
Oof. Yeah, and that's the scene I haven't really.
Well, he has a band called Old or OLD, and they debuted on Earache. It was the 5th Earache record release. Was the band called OLD, Old Lady Drivers. And that was a very young Jim Plotkin playing guitar, but he's a prodigy. And the Old Lady Drivers record was like a really fast thrash album that basically talks shit on old people, like every song, if you can imagine such a thing. It was like a comedy metal album, but the music was really good. It was all him. Like, well, not the drums, but he played guitar and bass on there, and he's really talented. But after that, the band Old or OLD, they went on to do like just kind of like more noisy, like guitar-based, like rock, metal, industrial stuff. The bass player from Nirvana was in their band for a while, Jason Everman.
Jason Novak, I think is his name.
I'm pretty sure it's Everman, but either way,
Nirvana? I don't know. Yeah.
There's a guy I think you should check out, and if you go back to their first release, it was also a really raw thrash album that was really good, but they went on to be like this weird Pink Floyd, King Crimson, like acid jazz shit. And Napalm Death at that time started doing stuff under the name of Painkiller with John Zorn, who did Naked City and Mr. Bungle, and there's all kinds of stuff like that.
Oh, it's all over the place. It's a rich tapestry. Extreme.
That it is.
Yeah, man.